All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to our speaker series, Diversity, Dynamics, and Crisis in Paleontology. Welcome to all the first timers and also to everyone who have been here for the previous talks. Your support is well appreciated. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to highlight our code of conduct to make sure that this session runs smoothly. So please take some time to go through it. So there are live captions available for this talk. You can use the CC button to toggle this button off, and you can also submit your questions later via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen or via the chat. So today we'll be hearing from Dr. Aline Ghilardi, a paleontologist based at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte in Brazil, where she leads the Dino Lab, which focuses on the diversity, ecology, and osteohistology of dinosaurs. She is also a science communicator and creator and director of the Bone Collectors Initiative, which promotes paleontology in various ways in Brazil and beyond. They recently released a Dino Hazard video game. They have a book series and a comics. The English version is coming soon, as I just learned. So definitely check it out. We'll put a link in the chat at the end of the talk, so you can definitely look into it. So now over to you, Aline.
Thank you, Nusaiba. Thank you all of you for inviting me to talk. Let's share the screen. You heard that 1,000 times during this pandemic times, right? Let's do it again. So you see my screen, that's okay. Well, hi guys. I would like to thank again Nusaiba, Emma, Jansen, and the organizers of this incredible event for inviting me to talk, to give me this chance of talking to you about a topic that recently got very much our attention within our discipline, paleontology. So today I'm going to talk a bit about scientific colonialism in paleontology, but specifically regarding some case studies from Brazil. So let's do it. I don't know, I don't need to introduce myself further because Nusaiba did a great job, but just for those that don't know Brazil very much, so here is South America, right? Here is Brazil. I'm located right in this corner there. So pretty much close to the Araripe region, which is here. I don't know if you see my cursor. Anyway, it's really close to the Araripe region. And I'm a lecturer here in the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte, where I work with paleobiology and paleoethnology of dinosaurs and other Mesozoic reptiles too. But anyway, besides being a researcher and a lecturer here, I also conduct some science communication activities on social media, on internet, and you can find me on my Twitter, on my Instagram, and here is our YouTube channel. If you want to check it out, we have some videos with English subtitles, so just go on, explore it. So here I conduct some research in the Diversity, Ecology, and Osteohistology Lab. Here's some of the research we are conducting with paleohistology, but we also work with the dinosaur footprints of the northeastern sedimentary basins here in Brazil. So you are welcome to visit our website also and see some of the research we are doing here. So just let's do it. Well, first of all, it's very important to note something. I want to start with a taste of the history of paleontology in Brazil, so you can understand the background behind what I'm going to discuss with you here. So before going deep in the history of the science of paleontology in Brazil, it's really important to acknowledge that original peoples here in Brazil interacted with fossils thousands of years before Europeans arrived in the 16th century. So here in this photograph is really interesting site located in the Sousa Basin region here in Northeast Brazil, basin which I conduct most of my research. What you can see here is a really rare type of footprint preservation. So you have coarse sandstone filling up some dinosaur footprints. So here you can see some theropod footprints, right? Let's go, paleontologists, you can see it. So here are some theropod footprints, and here you have plenty, along all this site, you have plenty of inscriptions made by original peoples that inhabited that region hundreds and thousands of years ago. So probably they recognized these features as something important, something different, and they want to mark it. So these are great sites where we have paleontology and archaeology side by side. So this is important to recognize, okay? And I'm not going to dive deep in this, but I just want to have some idea about how paleontology developed in Brazil. So the first records of fossils in Brazil were made by a Brazilian and Portuguese naturalist during the 80s here. And João da Silva Feijó communicated the fossil occurrence in the Northeast Brazil in the Araripe region for the first time. So the Araripe region fossils are recognized, one of the first recognized fossils from Brazil in written record. So as you can see here, the beginning of paleontology in Brazil is very linked with the Portuguese colonization. So the first people to mention fossils from Brazil were either Brazilian or Portuguese naturalists. After that, we have a long period of foreign researchers exploring Brazilian territory in search of fossils. Most of this research conducted here just collected this fossil material and took it to Europe or North America. So we have many researchers that visited Brazil from England, from Germany, and some of them were famous on their countries, such as Peter Wilhelm Lund, or for example, the expedition conducted by Spix and Volmartius, which resulted in a very famous book, Reisen in Brasilien. And all of these foreign researchers were very important for the initial development of paleontology in Brazil. Initially, as I said, most of the fossils were all taken out Brazil to fill up foreign institutions, so foreign museums, foreign universities, and so on. But we did have some Brazilian researchers, Brazilian naturalists, conducting some research in paleontology. The first research published by a Brazilian paleontology was in 1850 by Federico Bulamacchi, which was housed in the National Museum of Rio de Janeiro. That, well, may be recognized because it just caught fire a few years ago, just as Notre Dame Church also did a few months later. And as you can see here, I also punctuated in time when the National Museum of Rio de Janeiro was founded. So here in 1818, the National Museum of Rio de Janeiro is founded to develop the research in natural sciences in Brazil. So, okay, let's advance a bit in time. We will start to have a prevalence of Brazilian paleontological researchers from the 90s on. So here, We have still some influence of foreign researchers that were helping to develop paleontological research in Brazil and teaching some enthusiasts of paleontology, helping to some students of geology here. So we do have some foreign influence here, but now more collaborative, not only explorative as during this period of time, okay? And finally here, around 1950s, we have finally, for the first time, most of the paleontologists of working in Brazil were Brazilians. So this is the first true generation of Brazilian paleontologists that were formed here in Brazil. And this accompanied a great expansion of research institutions in Brazil. So there was around the 1950s a great campaign to train geologists here in Brazil, and many schools of geology opened in different regions. So not only in Rio de Janeiro, which is famous, but also in São Paulo, Rio Grande do Sul, in South Brazil, Recife in Northeast Brazil, and Ouro Preto in Minas Gerais state. During this period of time too, we have the development of the Petrobras. So the company that deals with the oil and gas exploration in Brazil. And together with it, there was many investments to develop the paleontology research for exploring oil and gas. So this was great for Brazilian paleontology, and we developed a central micropaleontology lab applied to oil research, which was fundamental for the development of micropaleontology in Brazil. After that, during the 80s, we have, again, an expansion of projects. We have the first Antarctic exploration by Brazilian paleontologists, and a great expansion of paleontological museums in Brazil. Finally, here in the 2000s, so coming close to where we are now, we had the second wave. It's not COVID, people, it's about the history of paleontology. So we have the second wave of expansion of research institutions in Brazil. So we experienced between 2004 and 2015 a great jump in the science investment in Brazil. And during this period, we had many universities being created, far away from the capital. So inside Brazil, we had also a great increasing number of publications of paleontology, a great increase in the number of paleontologists in Brazil. And this was the golden era of Brazilian paleontology. We also experienced internationalization of our research conducted here. Okay, after that, I think you know what happened here. So we are like diving in the deepest and darkest era of science in Brazil, unfortunately, because I don't know, maybe USA influenced some politicians and other places of the world. And unfortunately, we got our current president. And as you can see right now, we have some of the lowest investment in science ever. So I hope this just goes away, as I hope COVID go away soon. Next year we have elections. Just let's do it, all the Brazilians that are watching this seminar, okay? So this is a short introduction about the history of paleontology in Brazil. As you can see, Brazilians since the 1950s, it's pretty much independent in research and developed its own graduate programs, its own university, its own research, which is recognized internationally. This is important to know, right? That's why I wanted to mention it. And I also included in this timeline some important legal legal laws and decrees that were published trying to protect paleontological heritage in Brazil. So as I mentioned to you here, from the 1950s on, we have the explosion of Brazilian paleontology, but look how curious, just some years before that, we have the first decree law protecting paleontological heritage in Brazil. As I will explain to you, this decree law considers fossils as a property of the Union, and as property of the Union, they must be preserved and they cannot be sold and so on. I will explain that later. So this is an important decree that was published a few years before the 1950s. Then here I've just pointed out some other important legal terms published after that will be interesting for us to know further in this presentation. So, okay, let's just know a bit better about the legislation regarding fossils in Brazil. So as I mentioned, the first decree law is from 1942. And what does this decree law say? So this decree law talks about the protection of fossil deposits and says that fossil sites are considered public property and belong to the nation. This same law defines that the National Agency of Mining is responsible for managing these assets, okay? So this is the first time that Brazilian legislation made something concerning paleontological heritage. After that, we had something new in the Federal Constitution of 1988 that is important because it changed a bit this decree law. So now it's not considered property of the nation, but property of the Union. And besides that, it says that sites of paleontological value are considered Brazilian cultural patrimony. So this is important, okay? Because it involves this another decree published a few years before the Federal Constitution. So the decree number 72,312 of 1973 talks about the Convention on Measures to Prevent the Transfer of Illegal Ownership of Cultural Property. So what does it say, Aline? Well, it's basically prohibit and try to prevent the illicit import and export and transfer of ownership of cultural goods. So since in Brazil, because of the Federal Constitution, fossils are considered cultural patrimony, then this decree concerns fossils also, okay? And finally, but not for last, we have the Ministry of Science and Technology Ordinance number 5050 of 1990. So what does this ordinance say? So it regulates the collection of scientific material by foreigners according to a decree law of the same year. So this is the most important piece of legal ordinance in Brazil regarding the interest of foreign researchers to work with Brazilian fossils. So what this ordinance says, so it regulates the research by foreign researchers, and basically it says that this research must meet the standards set by the National Agency of Mining in Brazil. And which are these standards, Aline? They are all listed in this other ordinance, the Ordinance 15050 of 2016. This is the new ordinance, right? The most recent one. And then what it says? So the foreign researcher needs an authorization from the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovations, besides the authorization of the National Mineral Agency. So it needs 2 authorizations to work with this material. Besides, it needs a partnership with a national institution. It not necessarily needs to be a Brazilian researcher. It could be the National Science Foundation, for example. And so it needs to partnership with some institution, scientific institution from Brazil. And the most important that I will explain later is that this ordinance prevails the return of all holotypes that are exported to be studied outside Brazil. So this material can be studied by foreigners. It can be taken out of Brazil. But in some conditions, besides the permits of research and exportation, if the material exported has any holotypes, all holotypes must return to Brazil. Besides that, at least 30% of the specimens of each taxa identified at any time must return to Brazil. And furthermore, specimens of national interest are, for example, paratypes or fossils that are popular must return to Brazil too. So this is very important to note because we are going to see some problems further in this presentation. And finally, so we can understand better what I'm going to say later. For those that don't know the Brazilian sedimentary basins and the fossil paleontological heritage, here's a short introduction. So Brazil has more than 50% of its territory covered by sedimentary basins. So it's a very large area since Brazil is a huge country, a country of continental proportions. And in Brazil, there are fossils from the Archean. The oldest fossils in Brazil are from 2.4 billion years old, some stromatolites. And we also have from the Archean to the Quaternary fossils from almost every time period. Perhaps very few from the Cambrian, but from Silurian or the Ordovician, Silurian on, we have plenty of fossils till the Quaternary. Then it's important also to know that we have several important fossil locations, including many sites of exceptional preservation known by paleontologists as Lagerstätte. Here is an image just pointing out the main sedimentary basins of Brazil, not all of them, but the main. And for those that know the Araripe Basin, because it was famous recently because some fossils that were possibly illegally removed from here. So here is the Araripe Basin located in Northeast Brazil, and right here is where I am right now. So, okay, you have a good general picture about the geology in Brazil and the sedimentary basins. And here are some of the most famous Brazilian fossil Lagerstätte. So you may all know the Santana group from the Lower Cretaceous. So Santana groups pertain to the Araripe Basin. The Santana group is really abundant in plant, invertebrate, and vertebrate fossils, all from an ancient Paleolagoon environment, and it's located in Northeast Brazil, so right here. Then we have the Irati Formation. I'm not talking about everyone, just some of them that will be important to discuss here. So we have the Irati Formation, Permian in age, from the Paraná Basin. It's very famous for the Mesosaurid fossils. It was deposited in a shallow anoxic sea, so the fossils are very well preserved. And it's located in southeast Brazil. So we have here the Paraná Basin. So the Irati Formation is from the Paraná Basin. So it occurs from southeast, central, and south Brazil. We have the Itaboraí Basin, which is also well known from the Paleogene. It's a very small basin, perhaps one of the smallest sedimentary basins in Brazil. It's so small that was almost completely exhausted already for fossils. So it's very rare to find fossils in the Itaboraí Basin nowadays. So it's famous for its abundant early Paleogene fossils, especially mammals. And it's known here in the South America as the cradle of mammals of South America. And it's also located in Southeast Brazil, pretty close to Rio de Janeiro. So here is Itaboraí Basin, you see? And finally, just to mention another tree, here's the Tocantins petrified forest, also from the Permian, now from the Paraíba Basin. Parnaíba, I just got a typo here. So from the Parnaíba Basin here, Northeast Brazil also, famous for its abundant plant material. So plant material preserved three-dimensionally, not only trunks, but other parts of plants. The Diamondina Formation, Upper Cretaceous, it's famous for the well-preserved notosuchians, located also in Southeast Brazil. So right here, it's a Barra Basin is a sub-basin from the Paraná Basin. And finally, just to give another example, the Candelaria Formation from the Upper Triassic Paraná Basin, famous for its well-preserved dinosaurs, cynodonts, dicynodonts, rhynchosaurs, and so on. So Triassic stuff, people. And it's also located not in Southeast, but in South Brazil. So right here, it outcrops right here in South Brazil. So here are some of Brazil Largostete, so you can understand better the great diversity of fossils we have here. These are not all the fossil Largostete. We have fossil Largostete from the Ediacaran times in the Itajaí Basin to the Quaternary. So if you are interested in that, just Google it. You will find some incredible fossil sites in Brazil available with some science communication texts available talking about them. And talking about some cases that may imply in scientific colonization in Brazil, let me share some information, some more information about Irati Formation. So Irati Formation, as I told you, is famous for its well-preserved mesosaurids. An important fossil for the continental drift theory, right? So we have mesosaurid fossils here in Brazil, in Uruguay, and also in other countries in the African continent. So it's really important, they are really important fossils and beautifully preserved. We have different types of preservation, but usually the fossils are just beautiful. And that's why they attract the attention of collectors, commercial dealers, and, well, museums from abroad. Some context. So the limestone from the Irati Formation is exploited by civil industry, mainly for cement. But there are many universities in the surrounding area that regularly collect fossils from the Irati Formation. Today, the extraction is better regulated. It was not in the past, but after the 50s, the extraction was pretty much regulated. There are also several museums nearby the area where the Irati Formation outcrops, and educational activities are realized. It's a priority educational activities, they occur prior to mining authorization. So they are regularly realized in the area. There are also some interesting cases of mineral and fossil exhibitions in the mining companies to attract tourists, visitors, or schools, and so on. So we have some mining companies with mineral and fossil exhibitions, especially in São Paulo state. And finally, the main site of the Irati Formation, the most important one, not the only one, but one of the most important, let me say it that way, is registered in the national database. So there is there is local interest in the Irati Formation, but even with all those interests, well, some illegal activity still occurs. So this fossil wanted as, well, piece of, to be bought by particular collectors or museums. and they still are being sent out of Brazil, as I will show you soon. So here, to give you some more context. So here is a photograph of one of the mining activities. Here are some of the museums and universities that are housed nearby. And well, the Unity Formation outgroups side by side with large and well-developed cities here in Brazil. So here are some context. Brazil is a really diverse country. And here's some context of the Southeast. These examples that I'm just showing you, I was just Googling it before the presentation. So 5 minutes before entering here, I just Googled Mesosaurus Brazil buy, and I just found many of them available in several sites. So eBay, Etsy, and another sites famous for selling fossils. So even with all those local interests, these fossils are keeping sending out of Brazil. God knows where. Well, then we have the petrified forest of Tocantins, another Lagerstätte from Brazil that attracts a lot of attention from foreign collectors, fossil dealers, and so on. So here is where the petrified forest of Tocantins is localized in northeast Brazil. Here are some beautiful fossils from the petrified forest of Tocantins. Some context about it. So the petrified forest of Tocantins is listed among the 31 most beautiful fossil forests on Earth. It's also part of it, its outgroup of the outgroup area is protected within a conservation unit, a natural monument here in Brazil. So there is interest in protecting it. There is also a local museum. There is also universities in the surrounding. There are Brazilian researchers actively working on its fossils. And the site is also registered in the national database. Besides all that, we can still find some of this petrified wood being sold in the internet. So again, eBay, Etsy, on Etsy, guys, what is going on? And another site famous for selling fossils. Again, I just Googled it 5 minutes before joining this presentation. And just to give you some context, some figures, some images. So here is the petrified forest of Tocantins. So the natural monument, the conservation unity of the petrified forest. Here are some of the researchers that work constantly on this place. The place also has constant activity of schools and university students. Here's the small local museum inside the conservation unit. Here is an example of some of the fossil exhibitions conducted in the region to make the local public engage with the fossils. And here, just to give an example, some of the cities, of the surroundings, and the universities that are around there. So, okay, you see, it's a pretty much different context from the Irati Formation. It's a different biome, it's a different strategy of conservation. There is no active mining, at least now, and that's it. Still, there are people interested in buying it and having it in their houses and filling up their museum collections abroad, even with the Brazilian legislation, even with all the protection measures. And finally, the Araripe Basin, probably the most famous fossiliferous units, fossil deposits from Brazil. So here's where Araripe Basin is located, just to make sure you know geographically where we are going to be talking about. Here are some beautiful fossils from the Araripe Basin. The Araripe Basin has several units that provide excellent, very well preserved fossils, So here is one example of the Crato formation, and here from the Romualdo formation. So two different unities. This is the fossils occur in calcareous slabstones, and here you have calcareous concretions. So fossils preserved in 3D, fossils preserved in 2D. So it's a very rich fossil site, paleontologically speaking. And some context about it. So the limestone from the Crato formation is exploited for the civil industry also. So basically for being used in sidewalks or in house construction and so on. And that's how the fossils are found while the mining activity goes on. Then we have the Romualdo formation, but the Romualdo formation, which is this one where you find the fossil concretions, right? The Romualdo formation is not exploited commercially, but the underlying formation, the Ipobi formation, is explored for gypsum, so for plaster. And when the Ipobi formation is explored, the miners end up finding this beautiful preserved fossils. Around the Araripe area where the fossils, this beautiful fossils outgroup, there is a museum, and there are several universities that regularly explore the quarries. So they visit the quarries and search for fossils, and they develop educational activities with the quarry workers. They bring schools to teach about the local context and so on. So there are local researchers, and a lot of local researchers actively studying the area and conducting, including controlled excavations to understand better the paleoecology of it, not only which Pokemons were inside the formation, but how they occur in time. So all those organisms from the Crato formation, for example, they live together or not. So they're trying to figure out with controlled excavations more about the paleobiology and the evolution of this ancient ecosystem. As I said, there are educational activities regularly being realized in the region with the quarry workers, including the daughters and the sons of the quarry workers that are studying in the local schools. They are invited to engage with their parents there to understand and to help protect this heritage. So, well, the main sites of the Araripe Basin are also registered in the national database and as UNESCO geosites. So, well, you can just Google, for example, the Geopark Araripe or Araripe Geopark, where you will find some very good information about the geosites of Araripe Basin. So there are several forms of trying to protect the Araripe Basin going on there. It's not an abandoned area. And here, some context in images. So here's the beautiful Araripe Plateau. Unfortunately, this beautiful area is one of the regions with the lowest development, human development index in Brazil. So the population in this region, despite this beauty, despite its beauty, it's very vulnerable socially and economically. That's why perhaps this happens. So let's understand more. Here are some quarry workers. You can see as a very vulnerable population, the conditions of work are not the best. Even the mining activities sometimes are not legal. But that's the way they make their living, right? And despite there are many tryings of regulating the illegal removal of fossils and destruction of fossils in the region, this still occurs. And here, just to give you more context, this is the Geopark Araripe building there in the region. One of the geosites, and here is the Santana do Cariri Museum. a museum with one of the most diverse collection of Araripe fossils. So if you study Araripe Basin, you will eventually need to visit this museum. So plenty of holotypes and thousands of Araripe fossils are here, being studied by local researchers and being well, visited by tourists, schools, and so on. So despite all this, there are nice initiatives in the region that try to develop socially and economic the region, try to involve the local people in all these nice activities. But still, well, just to give an example, it still attracts attention from fossil collector, fossil dealer, and museums from abroad. As you can see here, a short Google search found 182 results for Araripe fossils on eBay. Yeah, certainly I'm going to send this to the federal police after this talk. So not only on eBay, but on several websites, again, on Etsy or famous sites for selling fossils and so on. So there's still fossil traffic happens. Well, and that's how some fossils may have ended up in exile. Here I give you some examples of Araripe Basin fossils that are being housed in foreign institutions, and that the authors explicitly in their publication, their papers, their articles express that the fossils were commercially acquired, despite the Brazilian regulation on that. So as you can see, we have, for example, Windia, Tupandactylus, Irritator, Ludodactylus. And just to show you, I'm not like making up this, here are some quotations from the original papers. So this fossil was obtained from a fossil digger, whatever this is. This is a region, this region is paleontological rich and thriving commercial trade in fossils have developed, whatever. Then here, the new specimens described here were both obtained by a commercial dealer. Again, this is the best one. Poor preservation, mostly by commercial fossil diggers prior to purchase. That give the name to this taxon. So irritator is a way of saying the authors were irritated by the poor preparation of the fossil prior purchase. Perhaps you shouldn't bought it in the first place. And here, Ludodactylus, the paper says the new specimen was obtained from a commercial source. So despite Brazilian legislation, and as you can see, all these publications are, well, recent. So this is from 2011, this is from 2003 to 2003, also 1996. And another thing we should notice, most of the time the same authors are involved. So let's see, Windia by Martiu, Tupandactylus by Fry, Martiu, Bucchi, Irritator, Martiu, Cruikshank, Fry, Small, Clark, or Ludodactylus by Fry and Martiu, and so on. Here are some more examples. For example, Lacusovagus and Tetrapodophis. So Lacusovagus, in the paper, the authors say it was obtained from a commercial dealer and the precise locality data is unknown. That's very poor research. So, well, you don't even know where exactly your fossil came from, which strata and so. Well, this one, it's not explicitly, it was not said in the paper if it was bought or not, but the fossil is particularly inaccessible for some because, well, some researchers have been reportedly difficult to assess. The access of some authors was difficulted by the owner of the fossil, since the fossil is in a private collection in Germany. So again, Germany, 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 Germany. Well, I got all examples from Germany, but not all of them are in Germany. There are some in Japan, there are other ones in the US, and so on. This is Susisucus, an Artoceps. It was not said exactly how the fossil was acquired in the paper, but it's a beautiful specimen. It was published in 2006. And here is the famous or infamous Ubirajara jubatus, described by Smith, Martil, Fry, Rivera Silva. It's not a Brazilian, despite the name Silva. It's a Mexican author, Norbert, in 2020. Now, in quotations, because the paper was withdrawn. It was never published. So it was in press and it was withdrawn for publication. As you can see, there are, these are only some of the fossils from Maraípe Basin, which are outside Brazil that may have ended up there irregularly. Some of them declared being acquired commercially, which is against Brazilian laws, and which make us think this fossil may be irregular, being irregularly held outside, since they are all holotypes. Remember, all holotypes must return to Brazil, according to the Ministry of Science Technology Ordinance from 1990. Well, yes. And well, despite many fossils are outside and they have been described along the decades, this fossil attracted a lot of attention recently. Perhaps because it is a dinosaur, perhaps because, I don't know, maybe Brazilian public is more aware of the problem. Anyway, it attracted a lot of attention and end up like exploding in the social media with the hashtag Ubirajara belongs to BR, or Ubirajara belongs to Brazil. And not only Brazilian paleontologists were involved in this, but the general public. So kids, paleo artists, the general public was engaged, pretty much engaged, and produced a lot of protest art, and so on in the media, highlighting that this fossil was suspiciously illegally outside Brazil. So since it's a holotype, according to the Ministry of Science Technology Ordinance of 1990, it shouldn't be there. Despite it had a document to be there or not, it shouldn't be there, because all holotypes must return to Brazil according to Brazilian legislation. So it is irregularly there. We don't know if it was irregularly exported, most probably, but definitely it is irregularly there according to the MCTI ordinance. Okay, this is really important to note. Dinosaurs have a public appeal, right? And perhaps the Brazilian communities just over all these things. Perhaps because we are more aware of it, because of the work of science communicators and so on. And all of these that I have spoken to you end up in scientific colonialism. So let's record what is scientific colonialism. So is that process whereby the center of gravity for the acquisition of knowledge about the nation is located, sorry, a typo here, is located outside the nation itself. So it's a concept from 1967. And here are some of the characteristics of scientific colonialism that we can identify in some of this this thing we just talk about here, these fossils and so on. So, for example, the face of scientific colonialism is in extracting or acquiring, buying local data, specimens, or knowledge, original knowledge from local people. All of this disregarding local laws, regulations and or culture, frequently using legal loopholes. So even if we have fossil laws and what you're doing seems legal, perhaps it's a legal loophole, okay? For example, these fossils here usually end up out Brazil being regarded as minerals, not fossils. So this is a legal loophole. So usually scientific colonialism use legal loopholes to act. Also, all of these happens by the authors, usually researchers, avoiding collaboration with local scientists, not sharing the benefits of the research with the local community. We can include many benefits here: economical, cultural, even science communicating to the local people about the results of the work. And well, all of these end up frequently in dubious, poor, and or non-reproducible research. One example is just not knowing exactly where the fossil came from. Are you sure it came from the Araripe Basin? Are you sure it came from this strata? So this is poor research and frequently non-reproducible research. And what the local loses with this. So the source country loses its heritage since the fossil is being taken outside Brazil. It loses its heritage. Science dependence is created or perpetuated in the region. So since the fossils are sent outside Brazil, if any local researcher want to visit, want to access this material, it needs to travel, and it needs to spend money, it needs to get a visa, and not always this is accessible to most of these people, right? So these are some of the quarry workers that actively help local researchers in the search of fossils. So here are some pictures because they were interested in having their names and the museum tags. That's why I took some pictures of them. They wanted to be remembered. And they want to visit the museums with the fossils with their names on it. So imagine some of these guys having to travel to Germany to see some of those fossils, the money problems, the visa problems, and so on. So, okay, this material just turns to be unavailable to these people, not only to the local researchers. And finally, the local science, the local economy, the local education and culture are all affected by this. Recently, we published this correspondence on nature, ecology, and evolution, and this beautiful art made by Gabriel Gomes was part of it. So here we explain step by step how the local economy, the local culture is affected. So how the fossils end up out of Brazil. So the quarry worker accidentally find the fossil. There are some foreigners or there are some fossil dealers interested in that and they offer money for that. This violates the decree law from 1942. Usually in this process, people with that has high currency value favor the buyer. So usually people that uses money with high currency value are favored. Usually these people, researchers, fossil dealers, or so on, they don't collaborate with local research institutions. They are only interested in their money or in the fossil to be researched outside. Then the fossil leaves the country without regular permit, without the export permit, appropriate export permit, which just violates the decree law from 1990. Well, Finally, here the country loses its heritage. The fossil finally arrive in a foreign country, whatever, Germany, Japan, or so on, usually in the global north. Fossils may be sold, and actions outside Brazil may be accessioned into museums or private collections either. Sometimes foreign laws are used to withhold the fossils. This is the case with Germany and Ubirajara recently. So they're using the UNESCO convention to withhold the fossil in Germany, alleging it's legally there. And being legal, it doesn't mean it's ethical. Anyway, first of all, it ended up irregularly and illegally there. And then, well, research is done in the foreign museum or institution. This make the museum and the researcher achieve prestige and publications which attract additional funding to these museums, researchers, institutions, whatever. Researchers from the original country, they do not benefit from it, and they must pay to visit this. So they must travel, they must acquire visa, and this is frequently difficult for countries with low currencies, so currencies with low value, such as Brazil now. And the country of origin now depends on the foreign country to study its own heritage. So here is where research dependency is created and then perpetuated. Finally, the fossil exhibitions will attract visitors, will contribute to the local economy, the foreign country economy, culture, and education, and all the original people from the country source will not benefit from that. So to make it more simple, now with animated figures for you. See, here's the visitors visiting the museum. So they spend money when visiting the museum, which helps in the museum exhibits and the museum research, which also can help in financing local universities. What else? Which ends up in the local tourism and the local economy, for example, restaurants, souvenir shops, hotels. So it goes to develops the local economy. And most interestingly, the fossils being withheld in the local place, imagine here in Brazil in the Araripe Basin, it can also help to develop local researchers, to develop local research and attract more money for research and for science, for local science. So this is a cycle. So you have better museums, you have better researchers, better publications, better papers being published. And this favors the local, that which holds the fossil. So when the fossil is outside Brazil, all this cycle, it's just interrupted here. And that's why perhaps we don't have not flammable museums, perhaps that we do not have the same productivity as other countries, because our fossils are not here, they're outside, and they cannot help develop locally. So even with these, it's important to see that we have, for example, in Brazil, more than 80 museums with fossil collections and exhibits. Not always with the best fossils, because unfortunately, most of the best fossils still end up out of Brazil through these loopholes. But we still have many institutions here, not only the National Museum, we have more than, again, we have more than 80 museums and great museums here in Brazil, some with this European standards that you should visit and you should know. Perhaps the ignorance of it makes some people use the argument of the National Museum just caught fire, so fossils are not safe in Brazil. We have much more museums than the National Museum, okay? We also have plenty of graduate programs in Brazil with advisors in paleontology. So we have plenty of researchers here working in the material that will be willing to collaborate in an international research. And in collaborative research usually end up in better research because local researchers know better about their geological context, know better about where the fossil occurs, about the other fossils of the deposit, and so. So frequently collaborating ends up in better research. So what do we need to do? How we change colonialism in paleontology? I would say we need to engage more in equitable, constructive, ethical, and collaborative research. Otherwise, we will be just biased in our discipline. So here is, it was a preprint that Nusaiba and the whole team of excellent female paleontologists worked recently. See what it says here. So colonialism, as well as socioeconomic factors such as wealth, education, and political stability impact research output in paleontology. Researchers in high or upper middle income countries contribute to 97% of fossil occurrence data, not only leading to special sampling bias, but also generating global power imbalance within our discipline. So if we want to overcome this bias, we need to engage more in equitable, constructive, ethical, and especially in collaborative research. So what to do? How do we work to decolonize paleontology? Some questions may arise, such, for example, what about museums with fossil collections that already have fossils from Brazil and we don't know if they're there legally or not? What about research with fossils of dubious legal provenance? Shouldn't we work on them just because they are illegally there or because they're dubious provenance? And what about researchers that behave unethically or in a colonial manner frequently? What should we do with those researchers? What should we do with colonialist researchers? Here are some things to think about, and how can we, what can we do to overcome these difficulties? So first of all, we must remember that local communities should benefit from their paleontological heritage. So for it, preferably, the fossils should remain in the custodian of the local communities. It is also important to rebuild mutual trust between researchers from the country of origin of the material and foreign researchers. So we must rebuild this mutual trust through a respectful cooperation between the researchers that will mutually benefit both local and foreign institutions or researchers, not only one side of this interaction. And finally, funding agencies must avoid facilitating research or researchers that are frequently involved in colonial scientific practices. Usually the names are the same. And well, authors should then provide some information about the acquisition of the fossil, such as research and exploitation permits. And when these are not provided, journals should refuse to publish these works. So journals should refuse to publish research which is produced in an unethical and irregular, under unethical and irregular activities. And finally, I think one way of overcoming all of this is, well, amplifying the voice of the excluded. So those that are being harmed by colonial practices in paleontology must be heard, because some of the privileged are being given more space to be heard than us. So first of all, it's very important to recognize privilege of speech, privilege of gender, of race, of linguistic, of, well, economic privilege. Because if we want to improve, if we want to diversify our field, this is fundamental. This is fundamental because this is the only way that we can just amplify the voice of those that are usually being excluded of the conversation. And they have spaces, they have power, they have positions, and we are usually not heard. Finally, I would like to say that we must, above all, recognize when we recognize colonial practice and we'll be willing to change that, well, changing that is the most ethical thing to do. We should be inspired by good examples such as this. So the repatriation of not only Cretapalpus vitari to Brazil, to the place of origin of this fossil, but many other fossil spiders that were in the same collection. So we should be inspired by these good examples of these great authors here. And just finally, let's think a bit about, well, science cannot be isolated from a social factor, because at its core, science is an enterprise created precisely to alleviate human miseries. So we cannot forget about the social involvement of science. Okay, science does not exist in a vacuum. And we should return some of those knowledge to alleviate local miseries. If you are interested in knowing more about the Araripe region fossils and the locals that help to find beautiful fossils from Araripe, and that unfortunately are in a vulnerable economic and social situation, I would suggest you to watch those two documentaries we made and that are available on our YouTube channel. So you can find them on internet. They have subtitles, so in English, so it will be not difficult to understand. So here is, you can find it as Treasures from Araripe, where we explain why the local community is in a vulnerable situation and how fossils end up being trafficked out of Brazil. And here we made sure that some of the faces that find the fossils be remembered in the future. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aline. This was amazing. Like, so much information in there. We already have a few questions. So there are two that are very related. So I'm going to read both of them and then we'll leave it to you. So the first one is, well, both of them are, it is really horrifying that there are people stealing scientific and cultural material and selling it like this, like it is decoration. What is being done by the Brazilian government to prevent and combat this? And then we had the question, are the police generally successful in tracking down illegal fossils that are being sold online? If not, what kind of resources might they be lacking?
Okay, I will answer the first one, and I'm probably gonna forget the second one, and I will ask you to ask me again.
Yeah,
so
no problem.
Unfortunately, we are going through a political crisis right now, and the current government is doing nothing to prevent that, nothing to prevent the burning of the Amazon and so on. So here in Brazil, what we are doing is fighting a lot, and next year we will have elections. So what we're gonna do is just overcome this nightmare we are living. And so that's it. Before this nightmare we are living, there were some initiatives from the government to overcome that. So we had, for example, a local office of the National Mining Agency in the areas where fossil traffic usually occurs. Unfortunately, during these last governments, this office was closed. So this, I don't know the impact of this right now, but probably we will see the numbers in a few years. And what we do have is the federal police and the public ministry working hard to understand how fossils end up out of Brazil. So recently we had a lot of operations, federal police operations, trying to figure out how fossil dealers, how researchers from, not only from foreign researchers, but some Brazilian researchers are involved in fossil trafficking activities. So since the federal police and the public ministry are independent from the government, they are working hard. And Brazil is a continental-sized country. Well, let's hope that in the next elections, we had a better government and things will be better. What I can guarantee to you is that Brazilian researchers are working very hard to overcome these problems. As you can see, all this noise being done in the social media and correspondences to journals and papers being published. This is a way of saying, just stop that, because we will not accept colonial practices in our science anymore. So we are fighting back. And the second question was?
Well, the second question, I think you've half answered it. Are the police generally successful in tracking down illegal fossils that are being sold online? And if not, what kind of resources might they be lacking?
Oh, they are. So you can use some Brazilian websites, the public ministry Brazilian website. You can just attach pictures of the website and como é que fala denúncia? And denounce? And report that there are fossils being sold. And also the federal police has some investigations currently going on. And last year, for example, there was the Operation Santana Raptor that figured out some individuals that were involved in illicit traffic of fossils. So the police is pretty much active, and that's it.
Awesome. So for the fossils in exile, what were the journals where these descriptions were published in, and have they got any policies on sample origins, maybe back then or now? Did they change their policies?
Sometimes their policies are just fantasies. They are there, but they're not respected. So there are some journals with very beautiful policies, like regarding the origin of fossils and showing some concern about that, but they still publish papers with, well, illegal fossils. I don't understand that. So we need more than words. As the song says, we need more than words, we need actions. And to guarantee we have some action on that, we have to put some pressure on the journals. So perhaps not publishing in those journals again. It's a good way to saying, I'm not happy with your with the way you guys are dealing with that. But it's a good start. So making the journal think about having a specific policy regarding the origin of their fossil materials, just fundamental. You gotta have that. But again, this need to be more than words.
Okay, so I've got loads of questions for you. What is being done, I'm guessing, by the museums that had these samples acquired in illegal circumstances? How do you think that should be the ethical behavior of researchers studying these fossils, and should the journals refuse to publish the results of these works?
This is a very delicate question, because you can have different situations here. So, and well, answering the first questions, I think museums are now, some of the museums are learning now that this is a big problem. And since they are learning now, this is a big problem, they are figuring out what to do with the fossils. Some, as the good example I gave about the Cretapalpus vitari, some institutions are willing to, well, at least negotiate repatriation or negotiate something in return to the country of origin. But most museums are still in silence. And other museums are actively refusing to negotiate or actively refusing to even talk with local researchers. And well, and I think sometimes there are specimens already being housed in that museum for decades. And if you're a student, working with that material shouldn't be prohibited, but it should happen. But if you are working with this material, you should think about perhaps initiating a dialogue with the country of origin. So just reach up some local researchers and try to perhaps negotiate something in return. So museums should do that, not the researchers, but the museums, the institutions where the fossils are, should begin a dialogue of how they can compensate for it. Not always repatriation, it will be better, but you can, for example, discuss exchanging fossils. You can discuss just making some digital data available so that local researchers can work on that. There are many ways of negotiating something in return to the country of origin. I think one of the best ways is just making the information digitally available so it may be accessible by local researchers more easily. We don't even know which Brazilian fossils are outside. For example, Ubirajara, we only knew about it when it was published. So museums should make their information about their collection available, and especially collection from abroad, so that scientists from other countries can at least know what is there that they can possibly study. And finally, I would recommend that as a young researchers, please take care who are you being involved during the research, because there are some researchers that are frequently involved in colonialist practices. I would say just avoid these toxic persons. Just find another people to work, find local people to work. So if you're working with Brazilian fossils, really, really, really consider working with a researcher from Brazil, because good information about the local geological context can be provided. Good information about other fossil occurrences from the location can be provided, and so on. I think that's it. There are many other things, but that will be endless.
Yeah, so we have time for one final question, which is quite related to what you just said. So where or who should be the first point of call for anyone wishing to work on Brazilian fossils, who has yet to make any connection with Brazilian researchers?
Can you ask again the connection?
So, just yeah, so for someone who has no connections with Brazilian researchers, who should they contact or where?
Perfect. I think we are pretty much connected nowadays, so you can easily find many Brazilian researchers in the social networks. So just go on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and you'll find like plenty of Brazilian researchers, and you can just message them, hi, I'm interested in this. Who should I contact? This is not very difficult. But if you are shy, and you don't want to do that, there is the local paleontological research, local paleontological society. So we have the Brazilian Paleontological Society, which has a website, which has an email, a contact email. Then you can email the Brazilian Paleontological Society and just ask for information. So I'm interested in working with Arabic fossils. Who should I contact? So they will certainly provide the best names for you to work with. And if you are not willing to do either of those, you can just, well, look at some of the published papers. So just look for some Brazilian authors and email them.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that. I think we've learned so much, and as you said, we could talk forever about this. Thank you to everyone who stayed over time, because we are a bit over time. And that's okay. And you can reach Aline on Twitter. She's very active there. So, you know, like if you have any questions or anything else, just send her a tweet.
Yes, exactly. And I would like to thank you again, and thank you all of you who had patiently watched this science communicator speak a lot more than it should have here. Thank you a lot, guys. Bye. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.